Welcome back to Geopolitics and Empire. As some of you may have noted, I've been gone for a few weeks. I went on some R&R. I took some leave to Los Angeles, California, traversing the Southwest. And we're back now. We're back to the regularly scheduled programming here on Geopolitics and Empire. Please do check out this month's sponsor, expatmoney.com/geopolitics. If you go to that website, that will take you to their registry for their upcoming online Expat Money Summit, October 1st. It's going to be free. I will be a featured speaker, and I'll also be participating in a VIP panel to talk technocracy in the Americas. The live stream is free, but if you use the discount code EMPIRE, you'll get 20% off the VIP tickets for lifetime replays and the VIP panels. Joining us for the first time is Keith McHenry, co-founder of the Food Not Bombs movement, author of the Anarchist Cookbook, who still is against this corporate dystopia. That's on his X feed bio. He's also got a new book and memoir, which I'm reading and very much enjoying, Soup Street. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you so much for having me. That's exciting.
Yeah, I don't know where to begin, but I only recently learned of you because of your appearance on my colleague James Corbett's podcast. I think it was earlier this year or last year. I very, very much enjoyed learning about your work. I'm reading about it now in your memoir. People can go get that as well. And it's interesting you mentioned in the first part of your book, growing up around the Grand Canyon. I literally, I'm a Chicagoan, and I literally just got back from visiting the canyon and driving alongside Route 66 for the first time in my life. And perhaps to get some background and context based on your book, before we get to Food Not Bombs, you apparently have some royal American blood. One of your forefathers has his name on the U.S. Constitution. And I think you said another one of your distant forefathers was the dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard, the man who killed Jesse James. Anything like that?
I know. I could not be more American. In many ways. So, for instance, the very first McHenry was Dr. James McHenry, who set foot in Philadelphia in 1773. And he came in part to study medicine with Dr. Benjamin Rush, who was in the Sons of Liberty. And he got, at age 22, he was convinced to go set up a field hospital in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in preparation for the Battle of Bunker Hill. And so oddly enough, I co-founded Food Not Bombs about a 15-minute walk from that field hospital when I was also just had turned 22. So anyway, he ended up on Washington's staff, and there's a quote which I have in Soup Street of Washington complimenting him for being good-natured and upbeat, and they would have never made it through the harsh winter at Valley Forge if it wasn't for his good nature. So that it's kind of funny because I think a lot of people that do know me know I am pretty upbeat, and probably that genes didn't change much since 1773 to now. And then James McHenry signed the U.S. Constitution. He was involved in the Continental Congress. He came up with the idea that if it's not a crime today, you can't be arrested for that crime after the crime has been made into law. That you can't. So that's his claim to fame in the Constitution. Then he signed the Constitution for Maryland, and then he became Secretary of War under George Washington. And under Sam Adams, he convinced the Congress to fund a standing permanent army. So he is a founder of the U.S. military. And then while he was, visiting with George Washington, there was a kind of indentured servant that managed the slaves, and his last name was Ford. So several generations after that, my grandmother, Bona Mae Ford's uncle, Bob Ford, and her other uncle, Charlie Ford, joined the James Gang. And they ended up killing one of the members of the James Gang at my great-great-great aunt's property in Missouri, and they became concerned that they would be hung for murdering somebody. So they made a deal with the governor of Missouri that they would kill Jesse James in exchange for clemency and supposedly $5,000. So he does kill Jesse James in St. Joe, Missouri. He doesn't get the money, but at least he isn't hung. And then eventually he tries to reenact the murder, but people love Jesse James, so he would get basically attacked. Couldn't make any money doing that. And eventually he had a gambling joint in Colorado, and one of the people felt he was done bad by Bob, so he shot him and killed him. And then the governor of Colorado organized a campaign to free the person who killed Bob Ford. So those are some of the connections. Then I have in my I think the only reason that my mother's father let my father marry my mom was because of this blue blood background. Because had they kind of known who my father was and my father's father, they might not have been so open to that. But anyway, so my mother's grandfather was on the intelligence team that helped plan the Pearl Harbor from the U.S. point of view, and he was involved in the blockade of encouraging the blockade of oil against Japan to try to force them to then attack Pearl Harbor. And then he organized it so there was a camera person on the dock that got a beautiful photo of the burning of the Arizona, and they made sure that nobody knew that the Japanese were going to attack, and so he would share that information with me. They said we had to do a false flag. Otherwise, the American public would never gone to war against Japan. He was very upfront about that. And then he also led the most deadly bombing campaign in world history, still to this day. I learned this from Daniel Ellsberg, speaking at the University of California in Santa Cruz one time. I was at an event with Amy Goodman was the keynote or whatever. And so I go, wow, I know all about that story. My grandfather would share it, the firebombing of Tokyo, Operation Meeting House. And then I watched him argue over the phone and from his den in Needham, below the 63 photos of the firebombing of Tokyo that he took from B-29 bombers that would fly over after each petro bombing raid. And he would argue with his best friend, Curtis LeMay, and with Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, that they should drop the atomic bomb on Hanoi to send a message to the communists that the capitalists would stop at nothing, that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not just a one-off, that we were willing to do it again. And it wasn't about winning the war against Vietnam and the Viet Cong and all that. From his point of view, it was defending capitalism. That was the primary goal of the U.S. military. And oddly enough, at the same time, his friend Curtis LeMay was trying to get John F. Kennedy to do a false flag in Miami, blow up a mall, and blame it on Castro. So this is kind of a long-standing ideology amongst the people in power. And he saw himself as a worker in the top echelons of management of the empire, he saw. I remember when he died. I spent the last summer of his life with him in Needham, Massachusetts, and he passed away my freshman year in high school. And I went to the memorial, and it was at a church, a congregational church in Needham. And the pastor was talking about what a godly man he was. And being 14, I was like very angry about that. I didn't express it openly, but he had explicitly said that there was no God and that he was in a satanic organization. And I never really knew whether he started when he was at Phillips Exeter, or when he went to Dartmouth, or when he was at Harvard Law, when he got recruited to this organization. But he made it pretty clear that's how everything works, and someday I'm going to have to decide who lives and who dies. And he referred to that as white man's burden, and that the people I would have to kill would have no moral ambiguity about their deaths. They would just be dead. It would be up to me to look at that, obligation straight in the face and just do it, just like he did, where he killed several 100,000 Japanese himself. He also organized heroin distribution to the United States, to the black community, because they were worried that the unequal aspects of the GI Bill would result in a rebellion by black soldiers returning to the United States. And so their strategy was, why don't we just flood the black community with heroin? They'll be busy doing that and trying to get money for heroin and so on. So he organized that out of Burma. He was stationed in Burma. And I got to meet some of his buddies from the war at some B-29 conventions. And, they would talk about, in fact, I learned to swim at a B-29 bomber convention in Alpine, Texas, and I wanted to share my little rubber, toy with the other girl I thought was so cute. I was in the third grade, and then I was bored just holding on to the edge of the swimming pool. So I started just pushing off, and then I go, "Oh wow, you can just swim!" And that's what happened at the B-29 bomber convention for me.
Yeah, and so this sort of segues into my next question, but yeah, I mean, some of those details I wasn't aware of, especially Pearl Harbor. I got the book behind me by Day of Deceit, exactly as you outlined, and I was actually taught that by a good professor at my grad school in Geneva. That Pearl Harbor was a false flag, as virtually most of the wars in the 20th century begun by the U.S. were, right? Lusitania,
Correct.
World War I, 1898, USS Maine, blown up by the U.S., blamed that on Spain, Gulf of Tonkin. I mean, you can just go on and on. And so I think that's good that your credibility is established, and because of the work that you've done, the revolutionary work, you can't really get more Americana, right, than
Right.
Keith. And in your book, you talk about in your youth. So was it your father? I think, as you mentioned, a lot of your family worked in the OSS and that sort of stuff. And you sort of you take a departure completely away from that, and then in your youth you begin having run-ins with authority. And I didn't understand from reading your book. There was that case where two cops, you were driving, I think the RV or something, and they stopped you, and it wasn't clear why they did that. And so, anything you want to tell us sort of about your run-ins with authority?
Yeah, I kind of intentionally keep things as what I saw in my mind as they were happening, so that it would be revealed just through the physical actions that were happening. So I was after my senior year at Boston University, where I studied painting and sculpture, and that's where I meet Howard Zinn and we become friends. I went and got work in Portland, Oregon. And my uncle lived in Portland, outside of Portland, Oregon. And so my girlfriend at the time and we rented a little studio apartment. It was even smaller than a studio, really. We had a Murphy bed, a bed that folded up into the wall. And her last name was Hurwitz, and we had seen Annie Hall. And I grew up in a Protestant and Catholic background, and she grew up in a Jewish background. So we just loved that movie. It was funny as could be. We could resonate with a lot of the, cultural differences between us. And anyway, so then I saw another Diane Keaton movie being advertised while she was visiting her parents in Studio City, California. And so I went to see it, and it turned out it was Looking for Mr. Goodbar. And I was kind of traumatized by that. So drove home. I had to be at work at I left for work at 4 every morning because I was superintendent of the Portland Art Museum. And then on, which is an accidental job, like many of my events in life were kind of unplanned but serendipitous. And so I was trying to back in front of my apartment building, the Belmont Arms, when these motorcycles got right behind me, in the parking space. And so I got out, assuming that they were just some motorcycle gangs, some nice people like Hell's Angels or something. And so I wanted to see maybe my muffler had fallen off. Well, it turned out they were police. And one guy started smashing me against the back of my pickup truck. I had this 65 Chevy pickup that I bought for my dad when I was in high school. And I was like, just being smashed around. And then they started writing me tickets, moving hazard violation tickets. And at one point, they order me to back my truck out of the street, but they don't move their motorcycles. So I accidentally hit one of the motorcycles. And I'm like, screw that. I want to run. I'm not getting back out. And all my neighbors were out there yelling at the cops and screaming at them to leave me alone. And so I just ended up backing over both of them and crushing them and leaving the scene. And my theory was I would just get on Interstate 5 and hop over the Columbia River into Washington State. I'd be out of their jurisdiction. I would get a hold of my girlfriend in Studio City and say, hey, I'm in trouble. Don't be surprised the cops will be at the apartment when you get back, and so on. But I missed the exit. I ended up in a car chase in downtown Portland, and at the end of the Hawthorne Bridge, there was that kind of maze of police vehicles and many police with rifles and pistols all pointing at me. And it's a very rainy, horrible, typical Portland, Oregon night. And so I just stopped the car and I put my hands on the roof, and next thing you know, there's pistols smashing out the windows, revolver stuck to my head. I'm pulled out onto those days, Hawthorne Bridge was not paved. It was metal grating. And so the guy is stepping on my head and says, look at, one move and I'll kill you. We'll say you had a gun on you. And that becomes my first arrest. And having grown up in national parks, the law enforcement had always been friends of my father's, rangers. So I had never any interaction with law enforcement in a negative way. And so I ended up spending a week in jail, and it turned out Beaverton, which is where my uncle was a long distance call from Portland, which is kind of amazing because it's like, 15-minute drive really. And so finally a guard, when I went to take a shower, this guard let me make the call, or dialed him for me. And then he came and he bailed me out. And that ended up really changing my life because, when I got a court-appointed attorney, he said, you're going to do 7 years in the county jail. There's nothing you can do about it. So you're young, you're 18. These are the best years of your life. You should just jump bail and get out of here. So I did, and abandoned the use of my Social Security number for a majority of my adult life. And that provided this amazing level of freedom that I was no longer tethered to the state in any real meaningful way other than the original driver's license I got in Massachusetts. And that would be like how I would get another driver's license and whatever. But my Social Security number was never attached to my passport or any of these other aspects. Eventually I get a passport. Nancy Pelosi, who was a congresswoman in San Francisco at the time, facilitated that to get me out of her hair. I didn't realize how much she hated me until years later, but she was behind the original arrests of Food Not Bombs. She was part of the team that had us arrested originally on August 15th of 88, which was supposed to put an end to our serving food in San Francisco, but instead just made people so upset that the next week we had a march down Haight Street, and people and another 24 people arrested on August 22nd of 88. And we were on CNN, which was a relatively new cable news channel at the time. And there was a story in the local media in San Francisco about how the former mayor, Aliotta, was in Italy visiting his family and was shocked to see they're all like, going, what's going on in your city? They're arresting people for feeding the homeless at Golden Gate Park. And so we ended up getting, a brief moment of media in the Times of England and Times of London and even in India and so on. And people were outraged, so they would send letters to Food Not Bombs, San Francisco, California, USA, and I would get the letter somehow. And I had taken notes on how I started the second group. because the first group kind of just magically happened over a series of unusual events. And I would send them a flyer called Seven Steps. I ended up taking my notes and making a flyer called Seven Steps to Starting the Food Not Bombs. And I remember that first flyer, I was so impressed they had invented the answering machine that I wrote, then you can even buy an answering machine and never miss an important call for your local Food Not Bombs group, you know?
And just before going further on food not bombs, I wanted to ask you, again, a great segue discussing your first arrest and how that changed your life. And I share many, maybe not all, but I share many of your views. Myself, growing up in the U.S. and vagabonding. I still haven't taken out Social Security for my kids. They were born in Mexico, dual citizenship, and I've been wondering, should I do it or should I not? And I'm sort of like you, where I have this posture toward the state where I want as little interaction as possible. That was one of the reasons I've enjoyed Mexico, because it's a failed state, and so you have very little interaction with the crazy state. And so maybe if you could just tell us a bit about your philosophy, anarchist or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so it's a couple of different things happened. Like when I was a child living at the Grand Canyon, my grandfather, who also worked at the Grand Canyon, he had an experience where he was a professor at Oklahoma State. I think it had another name at the time, agriculture and industry or something. And he was on his way to his first parks ranger job, and he had his car crashed, and he ended up convalescing in a Hopi village called Old Arribe. And this is in the beginning of the Great Depression. And so then he would take us out, the whole family out, to visit his friends that he had made in the Hopi land, and we would get to see the snake dances and green corn dance, and we watched them pour the original concrete for Glen Canyon Dam. We drove all around underneath what is now under Lake Powell before it was flooded, and I saw that beautiful land before it was desecrated with power lines and strip mining and all that. So also a little bit after that, when the fourth or fifth grade, maybe the fifth grade, our family has gone first to Big Bend. That would be the first chapter where I get cholera and learn about borders and class divide between people on the southern side of the river and those of us on the north. So I was the only one that lived of all the 28 of us that got cholera. So then we moved to Virginia and to Shenandoah National Park. My father gave me Walden by Thoreau. And I have dyslexia, so that was the first adult book I was handed. And because it was the first adult book, I read On the Duty to Civil Disobedience at the back of it. And so he notices that a government governs best that governs least, essentially, is what he's proposing there. And he refuses to pay. He does a night in jail. This is a lecture he gives in Concord, Massachusetts, justifying why he refused to pay the poll tax, because he would not pay for slavery and he would not pay for the Mexican War. So I was very intrigued by that, because you have the Vietnam War happening, and we had not yet, we would later that year desegregate our elementary school. But at that time, blacks had to go to school on the western side of the railroad tracks, and the whites got to go to the white school on the eastern side of the tracks. And you could go to the downtown drugstore and buy colored only, whites only, and no Jews allowed signs in the same stack with for sale, for rent signs, by the same company that makes those signs today. And so that really inspired me. Then I read Walden, and I was put in special education. And because it's rural America at the time, there was sort of either you had Down syndrome or you were totally mentally fit. You had no other options. So I was with the Down syndrome kids, and when they desegregated, all the black kids had Down syndrome suddenly, because they didn't want them to be with the white kids. So this influenced me greatly. And then I was being beaten violently. There's some pretty gruesome paragraphs about my experience of living there. And I convinced my father to send me to the high school he had gone to. So in the Park Service, you don't have high schools in the parks usually, and you're far away from a local community. So, like, for instance, when my father was high school age, he would have had to leave Yosemite Valley, where my grandfather was chief naturalist, and go to Merced and live with another family there to go to Merced High. So they sent my father and my uncle Keith, for whom I'm named after, and Mike Ansel Adams' two sons, Mike Adams, and I forget the younger son's name, and they would go to this place called Wasatch Academy in Utah, in Mount Pleasant, Utah, which was subsidized by the Presbyterian Church. So it's actually pretty inexpensive as far as the boarding school goes. And there's like 170 kids there. It was, girls and boys. And so one day I'm hiking up on top of the Wasatch Range, and I look I look south, and I see all this smoke coming into the valleys, and I'm like, oh, that's probably the coal power plant in Shiprock, New Mexico, and this is really hadn't been really spending a bunch of time there since I was there before it was desecrated by capitalism. And so I just said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to end this political and economic system. I'm going to dedicate my life to that. So I was 16 when that happened, and I was certainly mortified when I went to Thanksgiving dinner down in with a bunch of friends. We were partying in Sedona, which was before the New Age thing, so it was like a working class town. And driving by, you could see the power lines and everything that are featured in Edward Abbey's Monkey Wrench Gang. And I think any of us that drove down US 89 and saw that had the same feeling that we would like to topple those high tension wires and so on. Eventually, an acquaintance of mine, Mark, and Peggy in Earth First are entrapped in a case where the informant who was lovers with Peggy, having an affair with her, and he jumps out of the car and goes, "We got to take these down." And he had all the equipment necessary, and he topples one of the high tension wires, and she ends up being convicted of that, and Mark does. I think Mark did 8 years. They were like innocent, boy, how quaint America was back then, where you only get 8 years for something like that. Today, people get 100 years, for even much less. And so all of that played into a sense, seeing the Hopi dances, seeing the way the world had been for thousands of years. I'd be a Hopi if I was a Hopi, but I'm not a Hopi, so I'm an anarchist. So that's really basically how that comes about. And my one grandfather that took us to the dances, he saw the world in exactly the opposite way as my mother's father, because he was a medic in the trenches in Belgium during World War I. So he was super anti-war. He was super into nature, and he marries Bona Mae Ford, and this is how we end up being connected to the murder of Jesse James.
Yeah, and so and in your book again, because you're talking about the segregation, there's a MLK rioting story as well in your book, which was fascinating, and you mentioned Sedona, which again, on my trip recently to the Southwest, we took a day trip there. It was my first time there. I learned of Sedona through Aerosmith's Sedona Sunrise song.
Right.
It was on my list for one of the names of my children. The wife didn't approve of Sedona, so for the name. But I was there in Sedona. It's funny because I'm here in Guadalajara. They have a section of Sedona that is a complete remake. It's called Tlaquepaque, which is a remake of Tlaquepaque in Guadalajara, because there's a part of Guadalajara called Tlaquepaque, so that's funny. And I in many ways, when I was young, I was reading Thoreau and that sort of stuff, and that partially led me to join Peace Corps Mongolia, which is known for hippie type peaceniks A lot of them go to Peace Corps. I had a great time in Peace Corps, Mongolia. And then there I came across books by Sterling Hayden, right, who was in Oliver, no, was it Strangelove? He was the Strange. I'm getting where he started World War III with the Russians, but he got disillusioned with Hollywood, and he just wanted to sail the world, and he wrote the book. I think it's Veil Wanderer was his motto, and I think that very much aligns with the stuff that you're talking about. And so those were some of my inspirations along the way. And maybe just to go further then on Food Not Bombs. So I'm in the section in your book where you're talking about Reagan. So I think it was like around 80, Food Not Bombs was started, and then there was a second one in the 90s, and it still continues today. And so if you want to just tell us about the philosophy there and some of the work that was done.
Yeah. So anyway, I was studying painting and sculpture at Boston University, and I had figured out that if I was a produce worker, because the anarchists at BU, we started this thing called the Boston Food Co-op, and so I did produce at that, and that gave me the credibility to be a produce worker at Bread and Circus in Central Square, Cambridge, and that you have to get done setting up the produce before the customers come, so you then give time to go to to get to your first class. And so at one point I realized I should just start taking the food I'm throwing out every morning and to the public housing projects on Portland Ave, which is about 3 or 4 blocks away from Prospect Street, where Bread and Circus was. And now that's probably the world's smallest Whole Foods. So then one day I'm talking to the women there that I'm giving the food to, and they go, we've been watching this brand new building being built across the street, and there was this vast empty lot was behind MIT. And they go, they just completed it. And it turns out that they were designing nuclear weapons there. And so that's where I got the idea for the name Food Not Bombs. So I make a flyer. At one point, we temporarily called ourselves Food for Free Committee. We were going to be called the Food and Drug Administration, but our fundraising apparatus, which was selling drugs, we thought that might get us in trouble. But so anyway, we decide on the name Food Not Bombs. But before we become really that, I was in Clamshell Alliance, which was trying to shut down the Seabrook Nuclear Power Station, and I was introduced to that in a lecture my freshman year by Howard Zinn, who talked about how he is one of the 1414 that was held for a week or two in a civil disobedience action trying to shut down the nuclear power station, which was about 45 minutes north of Boston, right across the border in New Hampshire, Seabrook, New Hampshire, on the coast. And so I spent a year with the Clamshell organizing for the October 6, 1979 action, which for I think most of us that were at that was transformative. We were trying to physically take over a nuclear power station construction site, and the 82nd Airborne was there, National Guard units from around New England, state police from around New England, and they were dropping tear gas out of helicopters and water cannons and mace and beating the living heck out of us and everything. So then we decided to regroup and try to do it on May 24th of 80. And in May 24th of 80, Reagan is running for, I think he was still running for president against Carter. And so anyway, that one of my friends from Boston University, a law student, Brian Feigenbaum, gets arrested. And back in those days, for context, we would all use, like I would always be Alexander Berkman, and all the women would be like Emma Goldman. That's how you didn't have to have ID on you, and that way you could get out of jail maybe faster, and you didn't have any association with the state as a result. So anyway, he was the person giving the talking to the media. He had been chosen to be our media spokesperson for Clamshell, really technically the Coalition for Direct Action at Seabrook, and he so they knew his real name, and he just gave him his real name, and so he gets arrested for a felony assault of a police officer, which he was not involved in. And we find somebody with some money and to bail him out. So that night on May 24th, we get him out, and we're all driving back to Boston, and we decided we got to pay the guy back. So why don't we do bake sales? So we started doing these bake sales at Harvard Square outside the law school at BU and Park Street Station, downtown Boston. And we don't really make any money. But we have this old van, Sue Eaton's van, one of the other co-founders of Food Not Bombs, which we called Emma, after Emma Goldman. And we had a moving company called Smooth Move, and we're moving this family, and they're throwing out a poster that says, wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber? So, wow, that's a great idea. Why don't we get some used military uniforms at the Central Square Army Navy surplus and mount the poster on cardboard and then tell people we're trying to buy a bomber. And it was like, we didn't really make much more money, but we had so much fun. People would stop and talk to us. And one of our moving jobs was actually moving the New England Free Press. And we got all their overstocks. And so with that, we started, we'd put out the pamphlets on a table next to our food, and we would have all this dialogue with people. And it ended up being like a perfect thing to do. So one of the volunteers, Jo Swanson, she was in this theater group that was taking workshops with the Living Theater out of New York City. So they were very historic 60s theater where they don't, they get rid of the four walls and they make it like the people that are actually in the audience or become part of the actual performance and so on. So we thought, this is really great. We'll do this ourselves. And so we decided that we would have we would set up a soup line outside the stockholders meeting of the Bank of Boston. And the Bank of Boston were the people primarily financing Seabrook Nuclear Power Station, but also they were financing a lot of the weapons industry. And the members of the board of directors that would be attending this stockholders meeting were the heads of other military contractors in the New England area. So we were going to all dress up as hobos and do the soup line and say, Reagan's policies, because he'd been in office for a month by now, would lead to a future where our money would be spent on the military and social services would be cut. So that night we had all this soup and ready to go, but we didn't think we'd recruited enough friends to be hobos dressed up like the 30s. So I went to the homeless shelter, the Pine Street Inn, and gave a little speech to the guys at about midnight. And they're like, oh, great, a protest like the 60s. And sure enough, they show up. And it's this amazing experience. And some of the pedestrians were like, wow, Reagan's only in office 30 days and there's already soup lines in America. And some of the stockholder people going to the meeting gave us the middle finger, and others were like, this is great, this bank sucks. And then the homeless guys, it was almost all homeless men except for one woman. And they're like, you should do this every day. There's no food for homeless people in Boston. So that night we decided we'd give notice at our jobs, and we would do nothing but drive around the Boston area, picking up food that couldn't be sold from bakeries and produce departments and so on. And then we would take it to housing projects or to Rosie's Place, the battered women's shelter, or to Ozamon Alcohol Center. And there was a daycare that we took food to. And then in the afternoons, we would have our street theater at Harvard Square or the Boston Commons, where we would make meals, often thematic meals. For instance, the war in El Salvador was happening, and we were very organized against that. And we were doing, sometimes we initiated even we initiated a occupation of the federal building in Boston. And we would use our food. We pretend like we had El Salvadorian food. We had no idea what that would be. Our assumption it was like Mexican food. And we would dress up like El Salvadorians, or then we'd have death squad people that took the military uniforms, and, they would rush into our meal and make everybody lay on the ground. And sometimes the poor audience would be freaked out, like, what's going on here? And so anyway, that's started doing that, so for 8 years we were doing food not bombs in Boston, and we were really loved, particularly by Cambridge City Council, because Carol Hill on the city council had been a Black Panther before elected. Al Vellucci, who was the mayor, had been just a regular mobster, and he loved food not bombs, and he talked about how we'd steal the fish off the ships and give out free fish to everybody during the Great Depression. And he said, no one will ever have to be hungry in our town because we have food not bombs. And we organized 3 marches with city government to Draper Lab, where they were designing the nuclear weapons, because they were in solidarity with us, because MIT and Harvard didn't pay any taxes, but owned a huge percentage of the actual land in the city, and they were against war. And so it was like it was just so much fun during the 8 years of Boston, Cambridge. So when I go to San Francisco in '88, I'm assuming that it'll be America's most liberal city in the world, right? And so I'm working at a place called Bob's Typing, and I'm typing resumes and so on. And at lunch, first I become inspired to take up food not bombs again in San Francisco, because I had met Brian Williams, who was a Veterans for Peace doing the Fast for Peace against the war in El Salvador in Boston. And we'd had a big discussion. Should we bring food to the event? They're fasting, or is that rude? And Brian said, oh yeah, just bring food. Not everybody's fasting, just us. So that's become acquaintances with Brian, and then he gets hit by a munitions train in Concord Naval Weapons Station in Concord, California, and so my wife Andrea and we go to this big protest that weekend, and when we come home, they're back in those days. That's right before we didn't know about CNN really. I think it did exist, but we were watching the analog TV, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and lo and behold, and we were also trying to hide from the mafia in Boston. I have a whole chapter on that. I forget the name of that chapter, but anyway, we had to flee and go underground, and so we were kind of hiding out and living under aliases. My alias in San Francisco was Dick Lee, as something I learned from a guy named Dick Lee, actually, in the Weather Underground. Said, yeah, just get the white pages, find the section with the most names, and choose that name. So in Boston, I was Michael Sullivan, and San Francisco was Dick Lee, and you get all your utilities and everything in this alias. And so anyway, we were looking at the TV, and there's Andrea and I standing in the foreground in this news report, where people who I later find out are my friends are tearing up the tracks where Brian had been hit, and he lost both. His legs were severed. He currently lives in Nicaragua. So anyway, Andrea goes, you should just start doing food not bombs again, because you haven't done it ever since we went underground like a year ago. Just start it up again. So at Bob's Typing, I start picking up food from House of Bagels a few blocks away, from Tom's Natural Food on Geary Boulevard as well. And then I would take that to the food programs like Glide Memorial Church, St. Anthony's, Martin de Porres. And then at some point my boss, Bob, was an incredibly annoying marijuana addict. And I decided to give notice, and I start to, I started a new business posting posters around, because I was also managing Thumbtack Bugle, which was kind of going under. And so I just started making my living putting theater posters and art gallery posters in store windows for $1 a piece, and so on like that. But that gave me time to start doing more with food not bombs. So I'm trying to test places to do it. So I do UN Plaza, which turned out to be a really cold, windy, horrible place to do food not bombs. But these 2 kids who had graduated from the University of Maryland, College Park, in the study of the 1960s, which I was like, wow, that's wild. You can get a degree in that. And they said, well, let's maybe we should do this in the Haight-Ashbury. We read all about the Haight-Ashbury in the 60s. That might be cool. And we find out that there's no meals for homeless people in the Haight-Ashbury on Mondays, but there is on every other day of the week. So we set up at the entrance to Golden Gate Park, and we're having a grand old time. And I remember they really loved the Butthole Surfers, so we always had like a boombox playing Butthole Surfers while we're serving food. And we had like a literature table, so all the tourists as they come in could just get a flyer from us, and we talked to them about what we're trying to do. And you could see our sign, "Food Not Bombs," from like a block away, 2 blocks away, as you're walking down Haight. And it was just a blast. And the Grateful Dead was playing at the Oakland Coliseum, so there's a lot of Deadheads hanging out with us. And then one day this hippie comes by and he goes, "Oh, you can get a permit for this." And it turns out he's the director of the Haight-Ashbury Soup Kitchen, and said, "Just write a letter to this guy at the park department." So I do. And then the cops start coming by going, "Hey, did you get your permit?" And I go, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." So I go, I think it's going to be like a street performance permit. In fact, the letter even refers to the street performance permit we temporarily had randomly in Cambridge, which was basically your name and phone number so they could return your equipment if you left it in the Harvard Square or something. And so, so I go down there every Monday after the meal to see about this permit, and that no one there knows anything about it. So then on August 15th of 88, riot police come out of Golden Gate Park and arrest 9 of us, including myself. And there was a local photographer who lived in the Haight-Ashbury his whole life named Greg Garr, took black and white photos of these arrests. And one of the photos ends up on page 3 of the Chronicle the next morning with a United Press International story, probably the last honest story that would be published about Food Not Bombs in mass media. And so people are outraged and they we can't let this stand. And so they call me and we decide we're going to march down Haight Street with food and banging pots and pans and carrying signs and banners, and we'll set up again. So we set up at noon again at the corner of Haight and Stanyon, and the police make 24 arrests. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I find out there was 2 members of the, at least 2 members, it might have been more, of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force that were observing this arrest. And they send a memo on August 29th, 1988, to the FBI field office in San Francisco saying that we were a credible national security threat. At that point, there was a group that had been called Bread Not Bombs that we met at the Nevada test site during a protest there earlier in March, who we convinced to change their name to Food Not Bombs. But the internet didn't exist, so they thought they'd heard about this thing called Food Not Bombs, but it might be copywritten or something. And we're like, no. And we gave them flyers, use our logo. Then there'll be one in Boston, one in San Francisco, one in Long Beach, California. Isn't this cool? We're really growing a big movement. And so there's 30 Food Not Bombs people in the world, and we're now a national security threat. And it turns out I'm on a speaking tour years later, and I speak at Princeton, and then you get to stay in this fancy, where a building where George Washington stayed during the Revolutionary War or whatever. It had the kind of building with those plaques on it. And it was funny because the woman goes, "Oh, you get room 7 where Condoleezza Rice stayed last week." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I hope they wash the sheets. I don't want to get whatever's fascism is on her." And it was so fancy. They had all these remote controls. One turned on the heat and turned it off. One turned on the bed, turned it off, and one turned on the TV. And I'm watching C-SPAN because I can't stand normal TV. And there's a lecture, and it's like a State Department official at Medford, Massachusetts, at Tufts University, and he's talking about how there's a group that serves vegan meals in the park. Who's more dangerous, the people serving the vegan meals or the people or Al Qaeda? And at the end, the conclusion is that the people serving the vegan meals are much more dangerous than Al Qaeda. This is in April 2009. And that Al Qaeda is not likely to last another 20 years because, who wants to strap a bomb on themselves and blow themselves up? Whereas the people that serve the vegan meals are like local to their community. They're super friendly, and who doesn't want a free meal? And so he concludes saying that the reason that the vegan meals are more dangerous are that they're advocating that money be diverted from military spending to healthcare, education, and other social services. And therefore, there wouldn't be enough money to fight groups like Al Qaeda if the philosophy of food, not bombs becomes something very popular amongst the American people. So I spoke at Harvard Law maybe a week later, and I stayed at my dad's place in Hingham. He had a little analog TV, and I ended up seeing, or he had a little TV anyway in this guest room, and I saw the same lecture again. Otherwise, I would have probably thought I was hallucinating. And because, I go, wow, they actually are fearful of ideas, that's what makes you a terrorist, not blowing people up. So, that kind of explains why we got under so much repression. So eventually in San Francisco, we were arrested a total of 1,000 times for serving food. And because of, I kind of intentionally started the second chapter, I'd taken notes. And so when people saw the news stories of us being arrested and they would write us letters asking if they could start a new chapter, I would make I ended up making a flyer called 7 Steps to Starting a Food Not Bombs, and I would mail that to people who wanted to start groups. So there very quickly became groups in Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Victoria, British Columbia, and Melbourne, Australia, Tompkins Square Park in New York City. So I started becoming like a bunch of other chapters. And then in 1992, we had read, there was a little 3-paragraph article in the Chronicle about how Native Americans had met in Arctic Circle, Alaska, and they decided they were going to protest the Columbus, the 500th anniversary celebration of Columbus invading the Americas in San Francisco on October 12th of 92. So we decided we'd organize our first world gathering in San Francisco, and that's where we end up deciding that our 3 principles. And the principles being that the food would always be vegan and vegetarian and free to anyone, rich or poor, drunk or sober. That there'd be no presidents, directors, headquarters, that each chapter would be autonomous and make decisions by consensus and try to encourage the people relying on our food to participate in helping make the decisions. And that the third is that we would not be a charity, but that we'd be dedicated to taking nonviolent direct action to change society so no one had to live in the streets or eat at a soup kitchen. And it's those 3 principles that we reaffirmed in the 1995 World Gathering in San Francisco that really made it possible to be a worldwide movement. So there's a logo that's easily adaptable, like in Latin America, often there'll be a ear of corn instead of the carrot. Or if you're in Southeast Asia, it's often stalks of rice. Sometimes it's a potato, and so you have this kind of corporate identity, which I had been doing I designed the Brugler Bagels logo, for example. I don't know if you know of that chain. It's in the United States. I thought it was a mom and pop store, but it turned out it was a chain. I only charged them $250 for it. And then I was amazed 10 years later to see it on the side of a wall in Richmond, Virginia. But, so anyway, it just made it possible. The more we were arrested, we were ultimately arrested 1,000 times. I faced 25 to life in prison. And I'm framed on the California 3 strikes law. My first frame up was on the 4th of January, 4 days after the law took effect, where I was attacked by the mayor's film commissioner while I was making a phone call to retrieve my pickup truck that it was the first time I ever saw a cell phone. And he called the tow company to tow away my truck from a legal space in front of City Hall. And then he attacked me. I had to tell the toll lady, I say, hey, I'm going to have to find another payphone. Somebody's attacking me in this phone booth. So I call back to find my truck. And then I'm coming down those beautiful stairway in San Francisco City Hall, which has been featured in many, many movies. And there's this 2 businessmen and a cop at the bottom, and I'm wearing a chef's hat and a chef's coat. I had been standing in front of City Hall with a sign that said, Viva Zapatista, no NAFTA. And on New Year's Eve, we had received emails from the Zapatistas about their uprising. So we had been on our pirate radio station, San Francisco Liberation Radio, reading their communiques to the public and everything. So we're really excited about this. And I've got this chef's hat and chef's coat with the logo embroidered on it. And I go down, hey, yeah, what's up, you guys? You know, they're saying, we want to talk to you. And I go, yeah. And they go, oh, you're under arrest for assault, battery, strong arm robbery. That's a strike under the new California three strikes law. And then in May, we get facts from London from Amnesty International saying that we would be considered prisoners of conscience if convicted. So we're happily handing that out to the Board of Supervisors in the second floor offices when this woman whose boss was Barbara Kaufman. She was like the Rush Limbaugh of AM radio in San Francisco. And she slams the door on my friend Jesse and I put my hand up to stop it, and my hand goes through this thin glass. I didn't realize, and it cut my hand. And then I end up going to get paper towels in the bathroom and go to my car to drive to the emergency room, and I get arrested. And I'm charged with my second strike and my third strike. My third strike ends up being related to this alleged theft of a $99 beeper or pager. I don't think most people might not even know what that is anymore. But anyway, I ended up getting my three strikes. That, if the beeper had been $98. Would not be a strike felony, but they charged me with possession of stolen property, 24 Berkeley Farms Dairy milk crates, which we borrowed from a vegetarian restaurant on Market Street to use as our table because we're getting arrested basically every day by the police. And we had to sneak the food in. We would do this thing where we would divide the food into thirds so that there was a little bit of food would come in and those people would get arrested. We'd have a cardboard food not bomb sign for the police to take. Then we'd have another couple of people willing to get arrested with a little bit more food. They'd get arrested. And then we'd come in with a whole meal and feed everybody. So that kept the riots down. Then we had risk arrest one day a month with food not bombs, and communist groups would volunteer, church groups would volunteer. The National Lawyers Guild came to serve food, but the cops were like, oh, we're not going to arrest them. Instead, they arrest the people that came to eat. But all of those arrests and the three strikes and so on, and the fact that punk bands like MDC and Propaganda, Bad Brains, Good Riddance and all, started promoting Food Not Bombs in their liner notes and on their tours. And so eventually, now today we're at least 1,000 cities in 770 countries, and we may be even in 1,500 cities and maybe even 80 countries. It's my job. One of the volunteer things I do is update the map, and it is incredible how every couple of days I'll get a request for either additional meal in an already existing chapter, or renewing a chapter that had gone dormant, or a brand new chapter. And now even small towns are organizing chapters. Like Victoria, Texas has a super active chapter. I mean, I actually should look on the map where that is. I mean, I did update them on the map, but it's got, it's not a very famous town. And, so now we have volunteers like every week, share cooking and preparing and serving food in all these places all over the world.
I was just checking the map, and I haven't gotten to that part in your book. I did skim it, but you went to Croatia because I'm Croatian. I was seeing some of the towns in Croatia that I know, that I've been to, that I've lived in. Apparently, they have food not bombs. I did go to one of the cities. They do seem to have become dormant because I went to their YouTube. Their YouTube video was like from 19 years ago. But then I saw in Guadalajara, where I am, and I went to the Facebook of that Guadalajara chapter and saw you were here last year. So I just missed you.
Yeah, I had a fun time. I went down to Mexico because we had the cops parking outside of our house here in Santa Cruz, and my girlfriend, she spent 6.5 years in El Salvador during the Civil War, and she's been a peace activist her whole life. So she was like, they're starting to talk a lot on the media about Food Not Bombs being a terrorist group again. So, for instance, Jesse Waters on Fox News had a fake Antifa guy interviewed, and it was a very short interview. and they ask him, like, how did you get started in Antifa? They call it Antifa now. That's like the new maligning pronunciation of Antifa. But and he's going, yeah, you're like you're in Food Not Bombs. We all get together, we do Food Not Bombs and feed people and everything, and then, then we go out and we break windows and all that. It's like great, isn't it? And then they, and then the Antifa roundtable at the White House, referring to how people anarchists that are interfering with sweeps of homeless sweeps, and they're working in collaboration with the Democrats who run these shelters and so on, and they're going on and on about that. And we've been doing anti-sweep protests like every week here against the shelter because they're collaborating with the city to get rid of the homeless. And boy, this week has been really brutal what they've done to the homeless in Santa Cruz. But anyway, so she thought, well, you should go to Mexico for a while. So I wrote my friend Emmanuel in Monterrey, and I said, hey, this is when I land in Monterrey. Would you like to meet me at the airport? And he did. I didn't even give him a chance to say yes or no. And though I ended up hanging out, like doing the Food Not Bombs in Monterrey has got to be maybe 30 years old now. And I spent a lot of time in Monterrey and hanging out with them. And so they organized like a tour of Mexico for me, and that's how I ended up in Guadalajara. And that was just an amazing experience, and we're like sharing food. There's a lot of people apparently in Guadalajara, when they go to the hospital, their family's in the hospital, they really don't have a place to stay, so they just sleep in the park in front of it. And so we're feeding all those people, hanging out. And I kept having to buy more and more tortillas. We had a lot of free produce otherwise, but we kept running out of tortillas. So we'd go get another like 200 tortillas and then another 200, another 200. It was crazy. And that was like a lot of fun. And then I spoke in a vegan restaurant downtown in the colonial area. And they were doing like some kind of hokey municipal Day of the Dead event or something at the same time. It was really funny. So, but yeah, I was there. I've done Food Not Bombs in Guadalajara quite a number of times over the years.
So I'll have to keep an eye out for the next time you stop by. And I do want to ask you about the police state. This is one thing. When I woke up in the early 2000s, I thought, I'm a U.S. citizen. The U.S. is a country, and then you learn about, you mentioned some of the wars, 9/11, global war on terror, and then I come to the realization, this is an empire. I'm not a citizen of the United States of America. I'm a citizen of American empire, right? Doing all of these things, and then people who sort of don't ruffle feathers, they go about their usual day-to-day life, 9 to 5. They don't quite realize. I feel like there's a thin veneer, which if you peel back, we're living in this, whatever you want to call it, totalitarian system. And, I'm from Chicago. I remember reading years ago, The Guardian reporting that there are black sites in Chicago where innocent Americans have been renditioned, tortured, even killed. They did tend to be, there were whites, but the higher quantity tended to be blacks and Hispanics. But so I want to ask you, because from what I understand as well, you faced an employment ban, and then obviously being a dissident, an enemy of the state. I've experienced this in a very, very tiny way. Was it 2021, 2022? The Department of Homeland Security considered me a non-kinetic threat and banned me from PayPal, which Kim Iverson and Matt Taibbi covered. And so it's just wild for me to think that, look, I'm just a normal guy from Chicago, high school teacher that started a podcast. I like to just consider myself a podcaster. I don't say journalist. I just started having these conversations online, and for my government, our government, to debank me is like wild. So just your thoughts on the police state and yourself, the employment ban. How does it feel? What does it mean for you?
Well, it's really interesting. So originally in San Francisco, I was picked up by probably the police, although this is not clear who picked me up, and put in a van and taken to what I would find out is 850 Bryant Street, the police headquarters and the courts and everything. I was taken to room 136. And they rip off my clothes. It's dark. There's no lights in the room. It's a 2-story tall room. And they lift me by my arms and legs and smash me into the concrete floor. And so I'm just in my underwear, and they stuff me into this cage, which I later learned from Iraqi war vets is called a stress position cage, and held there for 3 days. And they give you like a little styrofoam cup of water randomly, and you can't stretch out your legs. It's extremely painful. And they did that to me 3 times. But my lawyer at the time said, whatever you do, don't tell anybody about this, or they think you're mentally ill and it'll discredit Food Not Bombs. So I had moved to Istanbul, and I'm celebrating my birthday on the Bosphorus, and that's when Abu Ghraib is just hit the news. And in Istanbul, there were these massive billboards at Taksim Square of the famous photos of like the deputy mayor who's standing on a box with a hood over him and electrodes attached to him from Baghdad and all that. And so we're talking about this, and I end up, we're at the birthday party, and that's the first time I admit that I had been tortured and placed in a stress position cage. That chapter is called Abu Ghraib in my book. And in fact, my wife at the time, who were still close friends, she was had wondered where I disappeared to these times, and I'd never told her what had happened because I didn't want her to be dismayed. And so that was the beginning of kind of harsher treatment, basically. And then I got a job in Tucson, Arizona, as the graphic designer for for United Way of Tucson in Southern Arizona, and I was hired to design their corporate identity. And 9/11 happens, and I was when I went into work that day, I always rode my bike. They called me the bike rider because I was the only one that rode a bike to work, and I see the receptionist is crying, and she has a little American flag on the little black, stand that the flags come with and stuff. And I'm like, I'd heard from a friend in the East Coast. He said, "Oh yeah, it looks like some planes have hit the World Trade Center or something. I'm not sure if it's real, if it's like animation or what." And so everybody's all upset, and we're going to now drop everything and just raise money for United Way of Manhattan, and it's like we have to make then we have God Bless America Day and all that kind of stuff, and we have to call all of our I'm tasked, along with many others, to call all the agencies that we give money to and make sure they know that none of their employees can speak out against a possible war on Afghanistan, or we will cut off their funding if we hear anything about any employees in the nonprofit sector of Southern Arizona. The vice president actually had a office near me, and she was kind of angry that was something we were supposed to do, but she wanted to keep her job, so she we did it. And then my boss comes in. Basically, we're going to start protesting the war, and Raytheon missile systems, all these missiles that are hitting, like the missile that hit the school in Iran was made in Tucson, Arizona, at Raytheon. And so there's an organization, friends of mine for years and years, I knew before I moved to Tucson, they wanted to hold a protest outside of Raytheon, and they wanted to know if Food Not Bombs would bring food. So I went to HR and I said, look at, the Food Not Bombs, you hired me because I was in Food Not Bombs, and you knew I would work well with volunteers. And so I just want you to know that Food Not Bombs is going to serve food outside of Raytheon. I know that's our largest client. And I don't, if it's I'd like to keep my job, and so I don't need to go there personally, but I just want you to be warned, and so I don't get any backlash. Well, that was enough for them to fire me immediately. So they fired me. And then I get another job working for the National Park Service bookstore. I set up a bookstore in Oro Valley, north of Tucson. And because I come from, I'm third generation national park. And I really enjoyed that job, but I get fired right away and not clear why. Um, and then I get another job with Sun Sounds Radio for the Blind. And Mitzi comes to me, the Mitzi Theron, the boss, who has been blind since childhood. I don't think she was born blind, but she was a really wonderful, innocent, naive American person, And she goes, I don't know what's going on, but I got a call that I have to fire you. You're on a blacklist. You're not allowed to work in the United States. And I had a sketchbook at the. Usually, I always have a sketchbook, and so I said, "Can you repeat this?" And I wrote down exactly what she said, the exact time and date that she said it, and the address she's saying it, because I was like, "Man, I can't believe this is the case." I was already suffering from fibromyalgia at the time, and I had married. It turned out with a honey trap, my second wife, and and so she's like, we had restored a 1935 Adobe house in Tucson, and I just loved working on it. I'd rebuilt a lot of it and so on. And then she's like, wow, now that, because of you being fired from United Way and so on, and now the government might take the house, so maybe we should get a temporary divorce. And I'm like, governments don't take houses, even if you are a terrorist, so you don't need to really worry about it. But I was so ill, and possibly she is the person behind this illness, that I eventually agreed to the temporary divorce, which turns out to be permanent. And she evicts me from my own house into the streets. So I become homeless, living in my truck. And um, and so then fortunately, around that same time, I had met somebody that I was saying, man, it's hard. I've been fired. I'm not allowed to work. And he goes, oh, I go to Oberlin College in Ohio. I could have the student senate hire you to speak about food not bombs there. And you could get like $3,000 for speaking at Oberlin. And so that's what I spent much of the rest of my days working at, because I could get the check before the government realized it. And that way I could make my living. And so I started living in my truck, and then I lived in a van, and I drove around North America, speaking at colleges and bookstores and stuff, and to make my living that way. And then on one of my earliest tours, I did a punk tour of northern Mexico, from Nogales, Hermosillo, Chihuahua, to Monterrey. And when I got to Monterey, I bought a school bus because one of the punk bands said, "Oh, let's get a school bus, get a school bus." And I happened to be in this cafe, and I overheard somebody try to get rid of a school bus in an emergency. He had to sell it right away, and I got it. I happen to have exactly enough money to buy it from him, so we do this tour. So when we get to Monterey, there's a helicopter above us, and the chief of police and all these other police trucks pull up next to us, and they're asking us what we're doing there. And I said, well, we're giving lectures and having concerts. And so every lecture I had in Monterey, there were two guys in khaki pants and polo shirts with sunglasses that would stand next to me. And I remember at the Autonomous University of Nuevo Leon, somebody in the audience goes, do you always have these two guys next to you? Who are they? Do you know them? And I'm like, no. I come to find out, I tried to get disability for my fibromyalgia back in Tucson. And the judge told my lawyer, says, look, at the CIA is explaining that you were able to go all over northern Mexico, so you can work. And so my lawyer said, either you do 5 years in prison or drop your disability case. And so I dropped the case. But so there's been those kind of things. But then in Soup Street, I have a I don't know if you've gotten to that yet. I don't think you have. I do the Unfree Trade Tour. So I'm over in Europe, and I meet. I'm doing a tour, and then some friends of mine, when I'm facing 25 to life, they're doing an event in Berlin, and they meet this guy named Manolo, and so he invites me to tour Spain. So I go on a 7 or 8 day tour of Spain speaking. And then he asked if I could organize a tour of North America, and has this movie called 50 Years is Enough, which was against the Bretton Woods convention or whatever it was called, about anti-globalization movie. And they had been going, and I'd already been to a bunch of anti-globalization protests in Europe, even as early as '92. I was in Bonn when it was still West Germany, and protesting against the Eurozone. And it was organized by anarchists, socialists, communists, labor, and environmentalists. They were totally opposed to the European Union. No one would realize that the left was actually against that after Brexit, because then you assume it's all right wingers. But anyway, so we do this tour, and every night at about midnight, 1 o'clock, sometimes as late as 2 o'clock, the UPS, or the mail, the U.S. Postal Service would ring the doorbell or knock on the door, and they have a package that they needed signed for. And the only time it was different than that was we were at the Leonard Peltier Defense Committee office in Lawrence, Kansas. He was a Native American political prisoner, and I had volunteered with him in 97, 98, and 99. And so we're visiting there, and somebody comes at about 2 o'clock in the morning with a tape measure, and he's in a business suit, and he wants to measure the ceilings for insurance purposes. So that was very sketchy. 60 days, we had something like that every single night. Then the other thing that happened was somebody was writing a blog, allegedly in Spanish, but apparently it was being translated into English. And they were posting that Keith hadn't fed them in 10 days, 15 days, 20 days. And so we would show up to each venue, each Food Not Bombs house with a carload, a van full of food. And they would give us a feast, because if you showed up to a Food Not Bombs house, they're going to give you a feast, even if there isn't this email blog being sent out saying you hadn't eaten in weeks. And then eventually we're thinking, well, maybe when they say that we're not eating, they're not getting enough meat. So Richmond Food Not Bombs buys them a lot of meat, thinking that will solve the problem. It doesn't really. And so then I'm over in Geneva, Switzerland, at the founding convention of the People's Global Agenda. And I've got like a little scrapbook of all of newspaper articles and things, and my old publication called the Food Not Bombs Menu. And there's this really cute woman reporter from Madrid. She's like going everywhere I'm going and asking me questions and everything and taking my picture all the time. And like, oh, wow, I'm single. Maybe this is cool. And then anyway, I end up one day, this people from Spain come to me and say, we want to meet you at at our hotel. So I go to the hotel, and in a room off the entrance, there's about 30 chairs with 30 people sitting in them, and then a chair for me to sit in. And they go, we want to know how you know this guy Manolo. And I'm like, oh, and because the part of what had gone on was that I was supposed to have embarrassed the Spanish anarchists by my bad treatment of Manolo, by not feeding them and so on. So I go, well, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I did insult the Spanish activist community somehow through this thing, even though it seemed like ludicrous. And they go, you need to vet people better. Don't you know who this guy is? He's the most famous Interpol agent in Spain. And then one woman said, yeah, my best friend was in an anti-nuclear group with him, and it was so crazy. She ended up putting herself in a mental hospital. And then another person they're trying to, and then one person said, don't you know he was the only one that was not either killed or arrested in the Gary Art Museum bombing in Bilbao when they're trying to kill King Carlos. And I'm going, aha. Because what I was at, in Lawrence, Kansas, when we're sitting there, and the morning after the guy tried to measure the ceilings, he's reading this Kansas City Star. He only speaks Spanish, allegedly, right? So why is he reading the Kansas City Star? And there's this article that he's all so happy about, and we look at the article, and it's how this plot to kill King Carlos fails. And we're like, that's weird. You're supposed to be this great ETA revolutionary. You introduced me to all the head of ETA when I was in Spain. And I was like, what's going on here? And that's what was going on. And it resulted in the death of one of the FUNAPOM's volunteers. He committed suicide over this in San Francisco. So there's the police state is very intense. And now we're getting to the point where, so I live in Santa Cruz, California, which is becoming what they call a 15-minute smart city.
Oh, by the way, when I was living in Kazakhstan from 2017 to 2020 and COVID happened, I returned. I've told my listeners this. When I returned to Guadalajara, they were building out mass public transport in a bid to get us out of our cars and all that. And I realized I came across the documents that show Guadalajara as a resilient city, which is financed by the Rockefeller Foundation, which is a synonym for 15-minute city. And then subsequently, in the past few years, you've had Mexican mainstream papers publish how, where's it, Hermosillo, the capital of Sonora, had made a deal with Foxconn to turn their capital into a 15-minute city, and then the rest of the cities in Sonora to make 15-minute cities. Mexico City, you can't make Mexico cities too big to be a 15-minute city, but I think they would chop it into multiple 15-minute cities. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, they did that in some of the larger cities in England. They just made it neighborhoods, 15-minute neighborhoods, basically. Yeah, and so Santa Cruz is run by essentially run by companies that are started by the Central Intelligence Agency. So like Google, YouTube, Meta.
Yeah, Facebook, and I often think of Amazon because Bezos' grandfather was DARPA, so I assume Amazon. Yeah. And I believe that everything to do with Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, Starlink, that's all Pentagon.
It's all CIA. And when you think back to the beginning of this interview where I'm talking about my grandfather being military intelligence, then when he firebombed Tokyo, it was in the Office of Strategic Services, and then he became like CIA after that. So I'm very familiar with that. But here we have roughly the city today of Santa Cruz is supposed to be a population of 63,000, and we have one hospital. The emergency room is already crowded to the max, and often you can't even park in the parking lots near the hospital. There's so many people there. So they are now building 40 high-rise luxury condo projects in this city, and if there's even one person in each unit, thankfully there probably will be no people living in these units, but there would be, there'd be another 30,000 people or something living in this town. We'd be up to 100,000 people in a small town that already doesn't have adequate water. But what they're doing is it's maximum surveillance at all time. Even though we technically voted to get rid of flock, the way they dealt with that is they put flock cameras in all the municipalities around the city, so you can't enter the city without passing flock cameras. And then they're also doing, they just bought other companies and have them do the surveillance. So we have a thing up here called Streetlight, and in it does facial recognition, audio recognition, and it turned out they weren't license plate readers. Flock wasn't really a license plate reader. It was like a total surveillance company, and it's integrated into Streetlight, into Ring, into Ring cameras, doorbells, into Amazon Street, into there's another thing that is called what's it called?
There's one called Axon as the flock alternative, and
there's even a little thing about like 5-inch square boxes that are on poles all over the community that is called Signal Track, and so you are like you can't go anywhere. Now in North America, I mean, the United States now, it's just out of control. They just built a new just opened a new AI data center that they're starting construction in San Jose. They already have problems with lack of water. They don't really need that. And then they're already using in San Jose, they're using AI to capture homeless people, to find where their encampments are and so on. And then the person running for mayor of Santa Cruz, his family owns a bookstore called Bookshop Santa Cruz. And he designed this, his company designed this predictive policing software that now is migrated into Palantir's targeting software and is being used in Palestine, in Russia, in Iran, Lebanon, probably other places of war which are less publicized, and so he's running for mayor, and he works. His alleged real job is working for the mayor of San Jose, who is using his software, Ryan Coonerty's software, to track homeless people there. And this week, they've decided to announce an end to homelessness basically in the city. It's hardcore. They didn't really publicly announce it, but there used to be a lot of homeless people living outside the homeless shelter. So they came in, they would sweep it. The cops would come in with garbage trucks and throw everybody's stuff away twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday for several years now. But now they decided to put up a fence that you can't even be on the sidewalks outside the homeless shelter. And if you're caught climbing over the fence in these cages, then you'll be arrested and charged with a misdemeanor crime. And then I'm downtown on Saturday preparing for a protest, and we have a San Lorenzo River goes through our town, and there's a levee, and there's a walkway, bike path, and jogging path next to the river, and there's like kind of a place where a lot of homeless people would sit across the street from this where Trader Joe's grocery store was and is. They cleaned out everybody on that, so there was like no visible homeless people, and they told them that you are not allowed to sit downtown. And you can't sit on the walls along the levee because it's you're only allowed to walk, ride a bicycle, or jog. There's no sitting allowed. So it's this like draconian thing that they're doing to get rid of the homeless. And meanwhile, they have these like I say, 40 high-rise buildings being built, and they have one layer parking garage in the building, basically for the workers. And you have to park your car if you have a car, because they're trying to encourage you not to have a car, which all sounds nice. You mentioned this, it's going to be a car-free city, and most people go, "Oh, that's so beautiful." But really, what they're doing is they're hooking everybody that lives into the city into this digital grid. And when I was in Mexico at the beginning of the year, they were talking about digital ID, that all Mexicans would have to have digital ID. And my friends were like, nobody's going to cooperate with that. And thankfully, I guess they put that on hold. But that's important aspect of the digital currency, which is what many of the people in the software business in Santa Cruz are trying to put together. They're also part of their car-free city. They have a company here, headquartered here, called Joby. And Joby makes flying taxis, and they're also trying to get these flying taxis to be autonomous. And then Google's also bringing in their autonomous taxis to our community, so that their idea is that you would not have a private ownership of a vehicle, but you would also be digitally controlled. So for example, if you use too many carbon credits, your money would no longer be available for either purchases of a thing that is a threat to the climate from their point of view, even though they're making all this electricity for AI surveillance data centers. So that's like clearly something crazy, and that everything that all your everything's electric in every building. So and then already they have smart meters on all the water. And everything sounds so nice, now, it's the way they sounds convenient, it sounds environmental, but no, it's just a digital panopticon. And I was held in a panopticon. The last jail I was in before my 3 strikes case settled was a panopticon in Oakland, California. So what that was the jailers sat in an office in the very center, and it's round, and they could see into each of the cell blocks. And so you were always observed at all moments. There was no way really to hide. And in fact, in that jail, they had this thing called prison TV. And what it was, so your unit was 24 people. And so they would show you this TV that was behind a bulletproof plexiglass box, so the sound was horrible. And the morning before the morning show, there would be okay, there's 24 people in a submarine on the bottom of the sea. You have lost contact with the surface. Who are you going to eat first? Then you would have lunch, and then there'd be another show. You're in orbit in a space station. There's 24 of you there. You've lost contact with the Earth. Who are you going to eat first? And then after dinner, there would be a very violent kung fu movie with slow motion of bodies being severed and stuff like that. And this went on day after day. I couldn't believe how many versions of 24 people unable to talk to Earth and who are deciding who to eat first that they could show. You know, it's incredible. It was amazing. So yeah, this is basically, that's what they're making for Santa Cruz. That's what they're making for the whole country.
Yeah, I just wanted to just go further on that. And you're mentioning your experience with entrapment. You know, I've experienced, again, on a very minor level, this sort of thing. I believe these same, you know, our friends, our government, the national security state, I call them, they play these patriot games with us. And so Geopolitics and Empire, I've had on the different socials and alternative socials, them like 3%ers is this rah-rah patriot military extremist group. I'd get invites from 3%ers to get me to join or them to join me, and I'd block them off right away because I know they're feds. Or they'd flood my Telegram channel. We got 13,000 people there, and on other social media with Nazi, pro-Hitler stuff in a bid to get me associated with that, even though I became, you know, I'm a Slav, which is Untermensch, and I married a brown Mexican and became a Mexican. Like, I don't know what was white supremacists would do that. My grandpa was in a Nazi concentration camp. And then they would go, they'd realize the futility of that. Then they moved to trying to link me to pro-Russian. But here I am calling out, you know, Putin's globalism. And then the latest case was trying to associate me with these Christian military extremists. You know, I'm Christian, but I'm like you, I'm non-violent, you know? And so it's just kind of like they keep playing these patriot games. I'm wondering what's next because they've pretty much run the gamut. But I wanted to ask you, and I was just in LA and I was observing this, that our friend was telling us on the sides of the highways and other parts of LA, you'd have bushes and stuff where the homeless would go to. They got rid of that. They put like wood chips, so there's nowhere. So they've made it so there's no, if you're homeless in LA, for example, they're making it so there's physically no place for you to exist. Because they're making, it's just like that's insane. So they're basically like pushing you off the cliff edge. And I just wanted to get, you know, this was one of my questions, which you started to touch on, the end game, the big picture. And it's my favorite topic, not because I like it, because I think it's the most important. What you just started discussing, you mentioned in your book, IBM being the company, because you mentioned Social Security and how IBM was creating a technology to file every, you know, Jew or undesirable under Nazi Germany, right? And so I interviewed in 2020 Edwin Black, the author of the book IBM and Holocaust, on the podcast, and I've held his, among other authors and works, very important because he's calling this system that you're discussing the algorithm ghetto. Others call it social credit system. It's like an electronic concentration camp. This is smart city, and so I just wanted to see if you can extrapolate any further what you see in terms of the danger, because this is the oligarchy. It's a global now, and you know, Yanis Varoufakis calls it techno-feudalism. Joel Kotkin calls it neo-feudalism. I put them together to call it neo-techno-feudalism. And I'm seeing here in Mexico, in the U.S., in Europe, they're wiping away the middle class. And that's all intentional. Home prices, you can't afford homes anywhere anymore. And I mean, it's worse in Mexico. You mentioned, yeah, they introduced Scheinbaum is doing what they're telling her to do. You
Yeah.
know, I keep repeating over and over. BlackRock visited her twice this year. Larry Fink, Borge Brand of World Economic Forum, Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan, Georgia of IMF. She's pushing the CURP Biométrico, which is the national digital ID for Mexico. Like you said, they've passed it, but they're not. They've got an uphill battle, and I think they're going to advance. So for now, it's kind of like lingering there. They've started cutting our phone calls. They want us to register identity with the phone. I already know people. A week ago, they started suspending phone lines for people who haven't registered. And then what's the other one? She banned cash for gasoline now. I don't know how they're going to implement that, but by the end of the year, you won't be able to buy supposedly gasoline for cash. And you mentioned the carbon social credit system. I've been talking about this for years. A couple years back in the Mexican banking apps, they have a section now that says they track your carbon energy usage, electricity, water, gasoline. And so you can see them building out this system where, okay, they're going to force you to buy gas electronically, which is then going to, in the carbon tracking system, they're going to see how much gasoline you use, and then they'll be able to force you to ration it. And so if we just extrapolate this to its logical conclusion, this is happening in Russia, it's happening in the EU, it's happening in Latin America, we're going to all end up in like a digital Auschwitz style camp. No, because like you said, if you commit a thought crime, they just press a button and you can't use the bank, even the public transport. I'm assuming, if you're a Keith McHenry, your pass to enter the public bus will not be accepted, right?
Right. Yeah, it can be like that. It's going to get worse and worse. And I think that it's interesting now because you see I don't know, we're doing a broadcast as potentially the U.S. economy is completely who knows what's going on. But, you have like Scott Bassett buying our own debt with our own debt, you have all the 7 big AI tech companies are buying each other's product with the same $700 billion, over and over and over again. Is it well planned out? But also, it's amazing. Like, for instance, another group called Brave and Free Santa Cruz, and we did one on showing how we showed movies, little clippets of news stories of how the digital world is like, so we're supposed to be different than Russia, huh? No, they've got facial recognition to get on the metro in Moscow, right? And it's like all over, everything is the same. And he was like, Putin was the darling of the World Economic Forum until the special military operation or whatever it's called. And then he's pulled off the World Economic Forum website. He'll be back on as soon as whatever they gain from that is, right? Yeah, it's worldwide, and they try to make it into like national things and stuff. They tried to do it in digital currency in Nigeria at one point, and they gave people bank cards. But what happened was the rich would go into the banks and get actual real cash out, and the poor would be standing there trying to get some cash out of an ATM with their new bank card. And they ended up, it pissed people off so bad, they started burning the banks down in Nigeria. So then they had to back up and do something different. And I don't know how that's going to work in places like Nigeria, but they'll figure out some coercive system. Then there was I tried to find this on Google. You can't find it anymore, but there was, when they introduced digital currency in India, apparently roughly 20,000 people starved to death because they didn't have electricity to power their digital currency and they couldn't buy anything. Now that's completely gone. When you Google that, what you get is Modi talking about how wonderful digital currency is, and now it's like saved the country. So it is an organized global clampdown, and you can see in so for instance, in the Santa Cruz City Council, or the city of Santa Cruz's website, it has Agenda 30 all over it. But the way they do it is there's a one page on it over here, and it just seems like it's only about parking meters. Another page over here is only about, something else. They don't, but it's all the same thing. That particularly Whitney Webb, the journalist Whitney Webb's written a lot about this. it's like but I think right now, I think partially what happened was finally they think their algorithms and their AI is successful enough that they really can have total digital control over everybody, or they would have done it before. And that's why all of a sudden you have thousands of flock cameras all over the United States just within 12 months. That you have there's very few AI data surveillance centers in the United States, and then all of a sudden, in the last 12 months, they're all over the place, and there's fights against them everywhere. And now they're like deciding that it's a military operation, so you can't be opposed to an AI surveillance data center because it's a national security issue. So local city councils don't really get to have a say about it anymore and stuff like that. Now you're criminalized if you're opposed to it. It's called an anti-tech violent extremist. And so all of this is getting more. I think that they must have some kind of a plan that's pretty universal, but at the same time, and maybe they were racing to a point where they were going to just sort of like the 1929 crash. The rich are just going to, they all know, okay, we're selling all the stocks, we're selling all the bonds, and we're just going to cash in, and there'll be like this economic collapse. We're going to do like maybe a false flag to go with it, and then you will be even the most reluctant people will be forced into digital currency. What happened to you with PayPal is like an early version of this, right?
I joke that I'm me among others are beta testers for the mark of the beast, and I guess you can change food not bombs now to food not data centers or something like that.
Yeah. There are like many groups are there's a battle in Burlington, Vermont, where they're trying to get rid of the homeless downtown, and so that group calls themselves Food Not Cops. So there's things like that. There have been a lot of these tacos not bombs down in McLean, Texas, McAllen, Texas, right?
And Mexico, we could do tacos, not narcos, because. So how far do you think? Because I'm seeing, they call me black-pilled, but my extrapolation has been more correct than those poo-pooing me as black-pilled. For example, some of the alt media has said, "Oh, they're not going to suspend your cell phone lines in Mexico. They're supposed to do it July 1st." And on June 30th, I said, they may or may not do it July 1st. If they don't do it, they're going to push it back, and they will pull the plug. And that's exactly what happened. August 5th. So, and I just came back from LA, and I saw in the Mexican airport, they had a new entire section. I didn't go through it, but they had these biometric face scanning, my immigration self check-in, like total recall devices. On the U.S. airports, I opted out of face scan for TSA and CBP, but I told the CBP officer, look, I'm opting out, but I know some days you won't be able to opt out. And I think it's and this momentum is building, and nothing is stopping it. You mentioned this week, I saw the flock cameras and the data centers. Some local towns in the U.S., they defeated the flock mandate, and then the data center, but the police and local politicians said, we don't care. We're putting them in anyways. So
exactly.
And so how much success do you think they're going to have, and what can we do?
Yeah, it is really incredible. Here's another, my friend David Rovick just put out a song and video about why there's no anti-war movement. I mean, we have this massive all these wars are like, bringing us to the brink of total economic collapse, So, that story is in the mainstream news, but there's no anti-war movement. So they were clever, I think, about that was they started this thing called Indivisible. And the goal of Indivisible was to make sure there was no anti-war movement and that the solution was voting Democrat. And that so people go to protests, but they're controlled by the Democratic Party and by, like one of the Waltons funded it. George Soros is funding it. You mentioned that, then you're an anti-Semitic, but it's totally true. I mean, before I wrote a thing called on my Substack, controlled opposition. And fortunately, I got all the details before the Open Society removed them from their website. But so I think that it's really hard to organize in that regard, and potentially one of the only ways. 'Cause I think part of what's gone on too is we had 20 million people come out against the Iraq War, and they did the Iraq War anyway, because there wasn't really a way of interfering effectively against the actual war machine, sort of the way Palestinian Action is doing in England, which is it's not stopping the war machine, but there would potentially would have to be something of that nature to address that. But you can't build support for that. People are already, I think that also the combination of the economy collapsing makes it really hard for people to do anything but work or figure out how to get money. So there's a problem there. That's another social control mechanism. Then you have using the COVID thing to divide the population. So I have a bunch of left friends that refuse the vaccine because we were already organizing against Moderna and all that because of other crazy things that Pfizer and Moderna were doing and DARPA was doing, right? So it seemed natural that you would then, okay, I'm not going to cooperate with that. But I ended up getting beat up by 3 people from Democratic Socialists of America for not to prove I was vaccinated. And I was like, that's like crazy. And so it's very, very hard. So I've written a few things on my Substack, Anarchist Cook, that maybe what really it is going to be local mutual aid taking care of each other and essentially stepping out of society completely, feeding ourselves the best we can from whatever the cast-offs of the corporate society is. I think a vanguard movement, to protest what's going on, very unlikely. And then it would be easy to hijack it. Like the FBI in the United States is running these parades of Nazis who all dress exactly the same.
Patriot Front. They're feds. Patriot Front.
Yeah, that's a freaking an FBI organization. It's so obvious. Or the January 12th thing was another psyop.
January 6th. Yeah, I think that was a false flag.
6th.
Yeah.
And my girlfriend Kathleen and I were watching it live, and we're like, "Oh wow, I've organized so many marches and protests outside the Capitol building. There's no way I would be let into the building unless the whole thing was pre-organized and pre-planned." And now you could find that they've at least 550 of the Trump supporters were actually FBI agents.
No, and you just give me a thought.
Incredible.
I mean, and you mentioned control opposition. I've been banging my drum about this. A lot of the podcast space are influence operations now, and I don't use names all the time. I let the listener be discerning. But one name, I'll only use a name when it's painfully obvious, and I'll throw Alex Jones. Right? I grew up listening to a lot of Alex Jones. But I just checked his feed recently, and he was having on Enrique Tarrio of Proud Boys and talking about the SPLC and Stuart Rhodes of Oath Keepers. Now, Enrique Tarrio, this is known now that he is a Fed informant, and just like you used for the other examples, he got all these people in Proud Boys, and on January 6th, they were, I think, well-meaning, useful idiots. They all went to jail. Except for Enrique Tarrio, because he's a Fed. Exactly. And now why is Alex Jones promoting him? And then you see Alex Jones promoting regime change. He's supposed to be anti-war. He was promoting technocracy. And, he was interviewing the CIA agent, Patrick Byrne, a year ago. And they were both like, yeah, we should regime change Venezuela and install blockchain digital IDs. I'm like, no, this is a control. This is an influence operation from the security state, right?
Yeah. There's so much of that now. It's very, very, I know. And then just on X, following X, if you don't know the people that are posting, a lot of it is, there's this one account which seems so hopeful, but it's just all a scam. But it's like, oh yeah, I'm down for that, but too bad this is fake because it's fake. But there's so much going on in that regard. And and the divide and conquer, that there'll be another kind of like similar thing to COVID, right? Like, so if you go to any anarchist thing now in the United States, you have to, or in Canada, you have to wear a mask, right? You can't participate in any anarchist things without, a mask.
But even with that, now they talk about gait and biometric. They can purportedly like. And I was thinking when you were talking about earlier, when you were in your early days, you guys would pick names from phone books and things like that. Like you couldn't do the original Food Not Bombs today. It's nearly impossible. Because, like you mentioned, Signal Trace or whatever, they capture your Bluetooth. Your even if you don't have a phone, it's and so it's I guess any closing thoughts from you. What you mentioned is one of the solutions is what most of my guests when I ask them for solutions say is that we're gonna just end up I think having a community of friends is the biggest solution, like a local network, which is what you mentioned and what many of my guests say, and just helping each other out and trying to become as self-sustainable as possible, whether it's food or whatever. And so I guess, and any closing or final thoughts for us?
Yeah, I think that, fortunately, Food Not Bombs started before the advent of all these things. And that Food Not Bombs itself could be a huge solution, because you're recovering food, you're doing you're building relationships with local store owners and things like that. But then it could be other mutual aid projects as well that are, and essentially just trying to, it reminds me like, in 1984, Winston, leaves the Matrix for a short while before he caves in at the end of the book. And, but that's I think that's going to be the thing. It seems completely, since everything you do can be known, even if you are not trying to be on the grid at all with a cell phone or something like that, it's hard to live unless you are like like Ted Kaczynski or something and go into the woods. And that's an interesting thing that Kaczynski, one being MK Ultra, which I find is fascinating, but that he actually had a message that was real and that had people. So for whatever reason, the security state deployed him to do what he did, which actually, maybe bombing people wasn't the idea, but the whole rest of the idea was right on. You read his manifesto and you're going, yeah, now he was writing about what we are now living in. But I do think the solution is personal relationships. And maybe we actually, for Santa Cruz Food Not Bombs, every week when I email out the agenda for the meeting, well, I always remind people that if there's no electricity and there's no phone service, that we all meet at this same location and then we communicate how together as to what the next move is. And so we've set up our infrastructure so we don't need electricity. We won't need to, we have a whole system set together and, envisioning that this could come to be an issue. And then the other is how do you, I got arrested feeding people in Orlando, and I was right at the beginning of kind of my having a cell phone. And it turned out my cell phone ended up in custody for like 18 days, and it was the main phone for Food Not Bombs. Well, that's crazy. I should have thought that through. So like, here's this big news story, and you can't get a hold of Food Not Bombs because, the cops have my phone. Anyway, so yeah, I think we have to really think about this whole getting off the grid as much as we can while we still are communicating with each other, as best we can. I remember I was in Prague for a while, and the anarchists there took the old Soviet phone system, which was abandoned because because Western Europe wanted a better quality phone system, and they set up their entire internet on the former communist cell phone system or analog phone system. And we would wait till the people in the building across the way to go to bed, the guard to leave, and then we go plug in the internet system in their power. It was funny. But people have been, the creativity that happened after the fall of the Soviet Union amongst anarchists in what was Eastern Europe, which is now Central Europe, was amazing. So there is this human, if you stay free enough, and I'm kind of hoping that I end the book with about being free, because there is this human spirit of which anarchism and other social movements not, really represent, and that's where I think our hope is we keep our humanity, and we just stay away from being slaves of the system. But it's really hard, to look how many Mexicans didn't want to go along with the digital ID much, so it didn't really get put in yet, because Mexicans are generally more free than up here. But it could happen, and probably will, because there'll be some way that you cannot feed your family unless you join their matrix, and you will be really in this predicament. So can you be in the matrix and not in the matrix at the same time? There may be like some fluidity where that's the partially what's going on, but they're going to know every detail. I was doing a podcast out of the homeless camp here in Santa Cruz with a formerly homeless person who did the cyber protest when I was in jail in Orlando, and he was hiding from the federal U.S. police in Mexico. And he thought he was on Twitch, and he thought that he would be safe and he wouldn't be captured. And sure enough, on the third show, he was captured and put in prison. So even like that, you have to be aware that it's not so easy electronically to stay out of the clutches of the state. And then the other message that I have is, I have in both Anarchist Cookbook and Hungry for Peace, how to avoid being convicted of terrorism. And one of the things is to, all the Food Not Bombs kids that have been arrested for terrorism or convicted of terrorism have all been, kind of innocent in a way. They were so naive. And so in one case I suggest people, whatever you're doing, feel really good about what you're doing. Be willing to stand in a court case and say, yeah, I am this person. If it comes to that, feel good about it. So don't do stuff that you don't want to have to become public. That's how it works with blackmail of all these politicians to do whatever is happening. Who wants to see the video of themselves eating a baby, right? All over mainstream media. So whatever you're doing, and on the other hand, you have to look at the prayer land defendants, and they were not doing anything that's objectionable. Yet, some of them got 100 years in jail. And because it was set up by the FBI, an informant had come with a rifle. You might not want to bring guns to protests, because not that there's a logic to it and self-defense against these Nazis coming at you and stuff. But the problem is the state has so much more information and power. So there was like a clandestinely, I've never identified the shooter who shot the guard at the Prairieland Detention Center, but they convicted Song for that shooting, and he got 100 years. So even though it was like totally reasonable to launch fireworks and do graffiti outside a detention center on Independence Day, they still got captured, and they spoke honestly about what they were doing. They didn't have anything to hide, but hopefully we will get them out. But that was a message, don't protest in the United States, basically, is what they're saying. And we have to we might get, when you do a protest, you have to be willing to, unfortunately, go to jail, maybe prison, maybe 100 years for nothing. But hopefully that isn't going to be any more widespread than it already is. And there is backlash against all these things. There's backlash against, even Indivisible has allowed their members to be opposed to ICE. And now Indivisible is allowing their members to be opposed to Flock. Even though Indivisible is not against the genocide, they're not against the war on Iran, you can't be doing that because the people that fund them support that. I was at protests against Gen Z protest in Mexico City when I was down there too. That's an interesting one where Soros and all them, the same people that do fund Indivisible, the same people that funded the 2014 coup in Ukraine, the overthrow of the Nepalese government, and you see all these anarchists like Crime Think all excited. Oh yeah, they're burning the Capitol building in Nepal, and this is exciting. And it's like, and I even have friends in Funab Bombs in the Philippines that are all excited about the anti-Gen Z stuff, and they were featured on the covers of, of English language Filipino magazines and newspapers. I go, watch out, man. That's funded by the U.S. and Ned and all that.
Yeah,
So you're just going to be used.
yeah, I was gonna say, and in that case in Mexico, our problem is like I don't know what the solution is, but I think my observation is correct, is that they always put us in between a rock and a hard place. And I have to say, I live in Mexico and I know how it is. Our government is a vile narco government. It's a globalist cartel narco government. They suck. They need to be, they need to go. But on the other hand, what you just said is also true, that this Gen Z stuff you're seeing here in Mexico against Sheinbaum and Morena is also an operation. So we're like, what are we doing now? We're stuck. I don't want, the narco state. I'm watching every week. Narcos burn people to death. Just take your car, take your truck, take your business. Like it's crazy. So, but and I didn't want to mention the color revolution stuff. And I wrote my master's thesis on this. And the nonviolent principle I think is the best. It's the most successful. It was used by Jesus and Christians. MLK used it, and they've weaponized it. Where that's why they use it through color revolutions, right?
Exactly.
But when we try to use it, they're like, no, you can't. You can't do that. But and as you say, I think we have to make it upfront that we're nonviolent, civil disobedience, abiding by the law, doing things legally as much as possible. And that's when they really can't. That's why they got to put a bullet in MLK's head, because he's going to take 500,000 people on the march to the White House and what.
Exactly.
And as soon as you get violent, they have the monopoly. They win there. So you can't get violent. And then and I guess one more thing I was going to add just to close out everything you're saying. Patrick McGoohan's The Prisoner. I loved that work, his show, and I think ours is the fight to not be filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. Our life is our own. I'll include all your links in the description. I think your Substack, your books, your website, where are the best places for people to go? Is there any other project we should know about?
Well, I do have the Substack, foodnotbombs.net. So the main thing about Food Not Bombs is it's all volunteer. So you can start your own Food Not Bombs chapter in your own community, or join one that's already existing. So that I think is the most important thing. And the purpose of Soup Street is for younger people to see that even through all the trials and tribulations and all the different issues, you can live a great, radical, revolutionary life, and you don't need to be depressed under these horrible conditions that we live in, because the human spirit is amazing, and we can. So just visit foodnotbombs.net, and I don't have my Substack link to that because that's my Substack. And Food Not Bombs is a worldwide thing of a lot of other people, not me. Now, I'm a founder. I'm one of 8 people that started it, but I'm not the head or the president or something like that, So I do keep my book is there, Soup Street, on foodnotbombs.net. I think you can buy it other places because people are saying they have the copy, and I didn't send it to them. But you can just go right to foodnotbombs.net and buy Soup Street. And it's right below the widget or whatever it is where you can get my emails randomly, which are very rare, but because I'm not too into it, but it's worthy sometimes. So yeah, just that's the main thing. It's all volunteer. And I think even if you weren't it's amazing the people that have the education one gets by just doing Food Not Bombs, about how people can work together, how you don't need a leader, how you you can cooperate. that you can make a better future, and even if it's a localized better future amongst the people you're hanging out with, and society you're trying to build in your own community. But that's really what we have now, not so much I don't think a vanguard movement. I have friends that are in communist parties of the United States, and they're nice people, but I'm not so sure I want them to become the head of the United States, for example.
Yeah, and the other point you made is also something I try to get across is in this battle against totalitarianism to remain to be joyful, and I always use the phrase is to have a chipper disposition, and not be down, and just keep moving forward. And you've led a fascinating life, as you've mentioned. I'll be finishing your book, and again, all your links are in the description, so people can go check out Keith's book, follow him on all his channels, X, Substack, and the Food Not Bombs website. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you so much for having me. That's so beautiful. Take care.